Israel has vowed to continue its war in Gaza with or without the support of the international community. The Israeli Foreign Minister, Cohen, issued a statement saying a ceasefire at this stage would be a gift to Palestinian armed group Hamas. He says this would allow the armed group to return and threaten people of Israel. Tel Aviv has been facing mounting pressure in recent days, even from its ally Washington, over the incessant bombing of the Gaza Strip. U.S. President Joe Biden, speaking at a donor event last night, said that Israel was beginning to lose the support of the international community due to the indiscriminate bombing of Gaza. The death toll of the Palestinians has now topped 18,500 since Israel started attacking the Strip. That followed attacks by Hamas on October 7th, in which 1,200 people were killed in southern Israel and more than 200 others taken captive. Meanwhile, public sentiment around support for Israel, as we were saying, appears to be waning for the Israelis at this point. People are saying it's not doing enough. The world's governments are saying it's simply not doing enough to protect Palestinians caught up in this unrelenting fighting that broke out more than 2 months ago. Let's speak now to Prof Stremlau, professor with the University of Johannesburg. Good to have you on the program tonight, Professor. So Joe Biden, speaking last night at this donor event, said this, that Israel is starting to lose global support over its indiscriminate bombing of Gaza. The words indiscriminate bombing being what's grabbed the headlines in the last few hours. Are they as significant as they're being made out to be?
Well, the international community has spoken in the UN General Assembly, 153 states condemning the lack of a ceasefire and recommending a ceasefire, and only 10 opposed it. The principle of that was the United States, and 23 states abstained. But more to the point of the suffering, there was this morning a joint statement by Mercy Corps, the Norwegian Relief Council, Oxfam, Refugees International, Save the Children, and they said that we've been operating for decades in Gaza, but we have never, ever seen anything like the kind of situation that is unfolding right now under the onslaught of the Israeli military. And what we're hearing this afternoon is that they're starting to flood the tunnels in an effort to try to kill off the Hamas leaders who supposedly are hidden in there. But in the course of doing that, they're not only putting the hostages at risk, they're also putting the Palestinian people at risk by virtue of the fact that putting salt water into tunnels will pollute the aquifers, and there's already no water, no food, no energy. And a travesty. Half the people of Gaza are starving to death, and they're mostly women and children. I mean, for heaven's sakes. So this nonsense has gotten to the point of where it's condemned as a crime against humanity, and that's exactly what should be said, and it is being said, but it's not making any difference to the right-wing Israeli Zionists who are prosecuting this war, and Netanyahu is using Biden's reservations to shore up his militant, take no prisoners, kill them all off, and get rid of Palestine, or at least turn it into a little apartheid state, or semi-state of domination by Israel, and that is not, in my view, going to be a recipe for any kind of a future for either Israel or certainly not the Palestinians. And
earlier I said you were with UJ, Prof. I know you're with Wits University. Just on what you were saying, apologies for that. In terms of the Biden administration, I mean, he made these latest remarks off camera at a fundraiser for his 2024 presidential campaign. Is the concern from President Biden, who, by the way, still supports Israel in its mission to kill off Hamas, is what he's saying now a sign that perhaps he's become increasingly worried that this violence is going to a point where the Americans may soon no longer be able to shield Israel from international condemnation or indeed potential war crimes investigations and prosecutions in a post-war era?
Well, we simply don't know right now, because he sounded more pro-Israel in the question and answer period with President Zelensky, who was in town from Ukraine. And speaking of Ukraine, there's a double standard. The U.S. supports the self-determination of the Ukrainian people, but doesn't support the self-determination of the Palestinian people, and hasn't for years. But of course, behind that is a confusion, I think, in my mind, between those who conflate anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. You can be an anti-Zionist. There's a religious state that's imported from Europe, as Mahmoud Mamdani rightly pointed out in his very interesting book, No Longer Settlers and No Longer Nor Natives, and compared the situation in Israel-Palestine with the ability of the South Africans to move beyond their historic animosities through identity issues and form a constitution that is inclusive of everyone. We know we have a lot of problems here, but it is an example that should inspire the more moderates on the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, who have yet to show their political strengths, and I hope they will in the near future. But in the meantime, you've got the most serious right-wing government that has ever ruled in Israel. And by the way, they, for all their talk about the ironclad security, had the embarrassment of the success of the, and I'm not condoning the terrorist attack against the Israeli civilians that killed 1,200, but an eye for an eye, for a tooth for a tooth has to be proportional. And now there are 15 or 16,000, mostly women and kids, who have suffered most grievously and died in Palestine and Gaza.
And on the issue of statehood, I mean, President Biden, as you're saying, in the Q&A with President Zelensky of Ukraine at the White House yesterday, basically referred to Hamas as animals and said it is right that the Israelis set out to kill the group because the belief is still that the region and Israelis in particular would be safer if Hamas ceases to exist. Whether that will be achieved or not is still an issue up for debate. On the matter of statehood, the Americans, about a month into this war, were saying that there needs to be a situation where Palestinian statehood is discussed, a two-state solution. It's been spoken about for decades. Recently, we're hearing much stronger comments suggesting that the Americans may in fact favor a situation where the Palestinian Authority, which governs the likes of the West Bank, for example, does the same within Gaza. Netanyahu, in a clip shared yesterday in an address from last night, said, well, he doesn't agree with that because, according to him, Hamas and the Palestinian Authority are the same thing. Hamas wants to get rid of Israel, he says, immediately, while the Palestinian Authority wants to do it bit by bit. Where does that leave U.S.-Israeli relations when there's a very clear split on what happens to Gaza post this incursion?
Well, look, I've got to try to condense this reaction, but it's a complicated question you're asking, because the two-state solution has been the default position for so many in the international community, and I think a one-state solution is probably in the long-term interest of both the Palestinian people and the Israeli people, provided that they can do it in a politically sensible way, which they clearly can't do it now in the absence of any kind of enlightened moderate leadership. And what we're seeing it's so cynical of Netanyahu. Netanyahu played Yahya Sinwar against the Hamas leader and was conned by Sinwar, so that he could think that Sinwar was his ally against the Fatah people, The Fatah are more moderate, but of course Abbas is 88, and so they need new leadership, and both sides need new leadership, and I don't see that happening anytime in the next few weeks or months. And so maybe it should be for the United Nations or some multilateral effort to sort of step in and separate the two sides and have a cooling off period. But I don't think that's realistic. So, I mean, that would be my desire in light of I mean, they should have, the Israelis and the Palestinians ought to own their own solution, just like the South Africans of both races did, and all groups did in the 1990s when they formed the Constitution that we also admire and live under. But nevertheless, in the absence of that, I don't think a two-state solution default is really on right now. Netanyahu's hell-bent on annexation, and the more moderate voices have been stilled by the Hamas attack, and yet I know that Netanyahu is not popular with the Israeli people. The latest polls show him at 27 or 25% support. So he's gambling that he can continue to annex what's left of Palestine.
You mentioned the people of Israel. They had been demonstrating before that 7-day ceasefire for the release of the more than 200 captives who were taken into Gaza by Hamas's arm during the Qassam brigades. They then said some of those hostages, in fact, were killed by the Israeli attacks, the bombs which have fallen on Gaza. They say some are being held by other armed groups within the Gaza Strip. As things stand, given the determination by Prime Minister Netanyahu to continue prosecuting this war, how will the issues around the safety of the hostages and their unknown whereabouts factor into his future at home? Because he says he wants them to be brought home safely, but how do you do that with bombs falling?
That's correct, and in fact he's being very cynical about this, and he thinks the hostages are expendable, even though he's prepared to pay a domestic political price and an international political price. The anti-apartheid movement was never as mobilized and critical on a broad scale as the pro-Palestinian public opinion in the world today. And I do worry about anti-Semitism, and we've had that issue debated in the U.S., where there's a long history of anti-Semitism. But Zionism is a caricature of the European ethnic nationalism that expels or kills off minority groups, and that was done in the 16th and 15th and 16th and 17th centuries. But now Europe is an enlightened region, and Israel is behaving just like it was a medieval ethnic nationalist power.
Professor Prof Stremlau from Wits University, good to speak to you. Thank you for your time tonight, sir.